Aunt snatched my fiance for her daughter. Now they're all crying after I took the trust fund and they realized my ex was a bum. So here's the thing. I'm 28 and I was engaged to this guy named Jake. He's 27. We'd been together for about 4 years, and last year we got engaged. It was supposed to be a small, intimate thing with close family and friends, but, well, it ended up being something a whole lot bigger than I ever expected, just not in a good way. To set the scene a bit, I've got this aunt, Carla, who's 52 and always in my business. Like, I never really cared for her much growing up. She's one of those people who compares everyone to her daughter, Megan. Megan's 24, and yeah, she's pretty, but seriously, there's not much else going on up there, if you get what I mean. Megan's like one of those people who you wonder how they even make it through a day without forgetting how to breathe. But whatever, I've always been the smart one in the family, and Megan's been the pretty one. Carla never missed a chance to remind me of that. So, Jake and I had been planning our wedding for this October. I was super excited because we were going to make it perfect, you know? Just before that, though, I got accepted to this summer program in the UK for work. Jake was totally cool with it, or at least I thought he was. Everything was fine when I left in June. We were talking every day, texting and all that. But after like 2 weeks, things just started to feel off. I'd text him and his replies would take longer and longer, and when we did talk, it was like he was distracted or just not interested. I asked him what was up, and he kept saying stuff like, "Oh, I'm just stressed about work," or "It's nothing, I'm fine." Typical guy, right? Always pretending like nothing's wrong when everything's clearly wrong. I figured maybe it was the distance or something, but we weren't new to long distance. We'd done it before without a problem, so I brushed it off. I was like, "We'll work it out when I get back." Well, turns out there wasn't anything to work out when I got back because Jake decided to take the coward's way out and just disappear. A week before my program was supposed to end, he ghosted me. Straight up, no more texts, no more calls, just radio silence. I remember thinking, there's no way this guy just bailed on me, right? Like, we're literally engaged. I felt so dumb for even wanting to fix things because it was like he didn't care anymore. Still, I tried to hold on to the idea that maybe something else was going on. Like maybe he was going through something and he'd reach out eventually. But nope, nada. I didn't hear from him at all. Then, about a month later, after I'd been back home for a bit, there's a knock at my door. And who is it? Freaking Carla. She's got this smirk on her face that I should have known meant bad news. Now, let me just say, Carla isn't the type to just drop by for a visit. If she's coming to your house, there's a reason, and it's usually not a good one. So I open the door and she hands me this fancy little envelope. "What's this?" I ask, already feeling like my stomach was doing flips. "It's a wedding invitation, sweetie," she says, all casual like. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, oh cool, someone's getting married. But when I opened it and saw Jake's name next to Megan's, I literally felt like the ground was about to open up and swallow me whole. They were getting married. My fiance was marrying my freaking cousin. I must have stood there for a solid minute, just staring at the invitation, not even blinking. Carla, being the absolute piece of work that she is, just stood there watching me. I swear she was enjoying every second of my confusion. When I finally looked up, I couldn't even form words. Like, how do you even respond to something like that? Before I could say anything, Carla goes, "I know this must be hard for you, but sweetie, what can we do? People fall in and out of love all the time." She actually said that, like it was no big deal that my fiance had dumped me while I was away to marry her daughter. Her reasoning? Oh, Jake and Megan just connected, you know? After work, he'd take her for coffee, and well, you can't fight love, right? At this point, I'm just staring at her, my head spinning. The woman is practically gloating, and I'm over here about to throw up. And then she hits me with, "Don't blame Megan, though. You know how beautiful she is. I'm sure Jake just couldn't resist." I wanted to punch her. I really did. But instead, I just kind of stood there, tears in my eyes, trying to process what she was telling me. My aunt, the one who always treated me like crap compared to her perfect daughter, was now telling me that Jake had fallen for Megan because she was prettier. And the worst part? She was saying it like it was my fault for not being as pretty as Megan. I somehow managed to pull myself together enough to tell her I had something to do and she needed to leave. As she walked out, she threw in one last comment. "Don't take it too hard, sweetie. You're still young. I'm sure you'll find someone, eventually. Just, lower your standards a bit." Yeah, she actually said that. When she finally left, I slammed the door so hard I thought it might break off the hinges. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just sit there in silence. I ended up doing a mix of all three. I couldn't believe the nerve of her. And I couldn't believe that Jake, would do something like this. The guy who I was going to marry, who I thought loved me, had been seeing my cousin behind my back, and now they were getting married. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Over the next few days, the whole thing just kind of settled in. I kept replaying all these little moments in my head, wondering if there were signs I missed, if I could have done something differently. But honestly, looking back, Jake was just a coward. Instead of telling me straight up that he didn't want to be with me, he ghosted me and ran off with my cousin. The worst part? Everyone knew. My whole family knew, and no one told me. They all just played along with Carla's little game, pretending like nothing was happening while they planned a wedding behind my back. It was humiliating. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. But I wasn't going to stay down forever. Nope, I had plans, big plans. And if Jake thought he was going to walk away from this without facing any consequences, he had another thing coming. So after my Aunt Carla dropped that little wedding bombshell on me, I was left standing there, totally wrecked. But you know what? I wasn't going to let them just walk away from this without feeling some consequences. Sure, I was hurt, but that pain started turning into something else pretty quick. Anger. And with anger comes motivation. I decided that I wasn't going to be the one sitting around feeling sorry for myself while they lived it up like nothing happened. Jake and I had shared a lot of stuff. One of the biggest things was a trust fund we'd started together. We weren't super rich or anything, but we both saved up for years with plans to use it to start our own business once we were married. It was mostly my idea, to be honest, because Jake never really had a head for finances. That should have been a red flag, right? But hindsight is 20/20ths. Anyway, I was the one managing the whole thing. I put in most of the money because Jake was saving up for his dream of being a writer. Spoiler, he sucked at writing. So, after Carla's lovely visit, I logged into the trust fund account, and there it was, all our savings just sitting there, waiting. Now, I could have done the nice thing and left Jake's share untouched, but after what he did? Nah, I wasn't feeling very charitable. I transferred every last penny into my own account. He'd contributed maybe 20%. But honestly, after everything I'd spent on him during our relationship, supporting his writing career, paying for his stuff when he wasn't working, I figured this was more than fair. I thought, let's see how you start your business now, buddy. He had no clue I even had access to everything. In his mind, that money was still sitting pretty, waiting for the day we'd use it together. The joke was on him. He was about to get a rude awakening, but I'd save that for later. A few weeks go by, and I'm hearing all kinds of gossip from family and friends. Apparently, Jake quit his job around the time we got engaged to focus on writing, but it wasn't really going anywhere. No surprise there. He wasn't exactly disciplined. Instead of putting in the hours and hustling, he'd spend his days with Megan, going to cafes, acting like he was some tortured artist. Carla was loving it, though. She thought Jake was going to make it big, and when he did, her daughter would be married to a successful writer. Delusional, right? But then reality started catching up to them. I found out through my mom, who, by the way, was just as disgusted by all of this as I was, that Jake hadn't had a steady client in months. He was barely scraping by, relying on Megan's part-time job as a receptionist to cover their expenses. I laughed so hard when I heard that. Here's Carla, who thought she was marrying her daughter off to this rich, successful guy, and now they were struggling to pay rent. At this point, I still hadn't heard from Jake, and I was perfectly fine with that. Let him live in his little fantasy world for as long as he could. But of course, you can't avoid reality forever. One day, I was at my mom's house, just catching up on things, and there's a knock at the door. You can probably guess who it was. Jake, standing there with this pathetic look on his face like a lost puppy. My mom looked at me like, "Do you want me to get rid of him?" But I shook my head. I was ready for this. Jake came in, all awkward, trying to make small talk like we were still on good terms or something. I just sat there, letting him squirm. Finally, he got to the point. I need to talk to you about the trust fund. I didn't say anything at first, just raised an eyebrow. He continued, I know things ended badly, but we had that money saved up, for the business. He was stumbling over his words, clearly nervous. I need my half of it. Now let me tell you, it took everything in me not to burst out laughing right then and there. I just calmly said, what money? Jake looked confused. The trust fund, the one we were saving up together. Oh, that, I said, pretending like I just remembered. Yeah, I liquidated it. His face turned white. You... what? I took all the money out, I said, keeping my tone as nonchalant as possible. It's gone. He went from shock to anger in about 2 seconds. How could you do that? That was our money. We were going to start a business with that. I shrugged. There is no we anymore, remember? You're married to Megan now. And technically, most of that money was mine anyway. I supported you for months when you weren't working, so I'd say it evens out. Jake looked like he was going to explode. That's not fair. I put in money too. Yeah, and I spent a lot of my own money keeping you afloat, I shot back. So unless you want to take this to court and try to explain how you used my debit card to cover your bills when you weren't working, I'd suggest you drop it. He looked at me, mouth open, completely speechless. I could see the gears turning in his head as he realized he had no leg to stand on. If he pushed this any further, he'd end up owing me more than he already did. Fine, he muttered, clearly defeated. I'll drop it. He got up to leave, but not before giving me one last pleading look. I'm in a bad spot, you know. I don't have a job, and Megan's barely making enough for both of us. I thought, I thought maybe we could talk. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered how he'd ghosted me, married my cousin behind my back, and expected me to just roll over and take it. So I just smiled and said, good luck with that. He left, and I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt like I was getting control of my life back. Update 1. So after Jake came by and realized he wasn't getting a dime from me, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd slink off and try to get his life together. You know, face the consequences of his choices like an adult. But of course, that would have been too easy, right? Things were just about to get messier because apparently Jake wasn't the only one with his eyes on the trust fund. A few days after the Jake situation, I'm chilling at my mom's place again, thinking I could actually have some peace. Wrong. There's another knock at the door. This time it's Carla and Megan. Honestly, I should have expected this. Of course, if Jake had come begging for money and got nothing, Carla would show up next. She was always the type to think she could talk her way out of anything. And I guess she thought she'd just show up and charm her way into getting some of that money back for her precious daughter. I opened the door and Carla immediately goes into this fake smile mode. Hi, sweetie. We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by. Yeah, sure. Just happened to be in the neighborhood. Megan's standing behind her, looking like she's about to burst into tears, which, honestly, was probably all part of the plan to make me feel guilty. Not gonna lie, it was kind of satisfying seeing her like that after everything that happened. But I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of acting like I cared. Carla goes, "Can we come in for a quick chat?" Before I can even say anything, she's already walking into the living room like she owns the place. Megan trails behind, looking like a sad little puppy. I'm like, okay, what's this about? Because I'm not in the mood for any more of their BS. Carla, of course, launches straight into it. We heard you talk to Jake the other day, she starts, all casual like she's discussing the weather. And well, he mentioned the trust fund and how you liquidated it. I didn't say anything, just crossed my arms and stared at her. She's fidgeting a bit, but trying to keep her fake smile going. Look, I know things didn't end well between you and Jake, but Megan and Jake are struggling right now. It's not easy starting a marriage when money's tight, and I just thought, maybe you could give them his share. It's only fair. I almost laughed out loud at that. Fair? I asked. Fair like how Jake dumped me and married my cousin behind my back? That kind of fair? Carla waved her hand like I was talking about some minor inconvenience. Oh, sweetie, don't be so dramatic. People move on, things change. But this money, this is about starting their life together. They need it. And there it was. The real reason for her visit. It wasn't about me or any kind of closure. Carla was just here to beg for money as usual. I glanced at Megan, who was still trying to look sad, but I could tell she was just as desperate as Carla. I sighed, trying to keep calm. Look, Carla, I said, I'm not giving them any money. Jake doesn't deserve a thing from me, and frankly, neither does Megan. They made their bed, now they can lie in it. That's when Megan finally spoke up. Her voice was shaky, like she was about to cry for real this time. Please, it's not like we're asking for much. We're going to get evicted if we don't pay rent soon. I didn't know things would get this bad. I raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. You're telling me you had no idea that Jake wasn't making any money when you two got married? Megan hesitated for a second, then shook her head. He told me he was working on some writing projects. I thought it would pay off, but it hasn't. I thought things would be different. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, well, guess what? Things aren't different. Jake's a bum, and now you're stuck with him. That's your problem, not mine. Carla looked like she was getting desperate now. She stepped closer, dropping the fake friendly act. You know, you've always been so smart. I've always admired that about you. You're doing so well for yourself, and we're just asking for a little help. You don't need the money like they do. This woman. I swear I could feel my blood boiling at that point. Carla, I don't need you to compliment me to try and manipulate me. You've never given a damn about me until now when you want something. You've always treated me like I'm less than Megan because she's prettier or whatever, and now you want me to bail her out? Are you kidding me? She opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't done. And besides, You knew exactly what was going on. You were all for Jake and Megan getting married. You thought you hit the jackpot because you thought Jake was going to be some big shot writer. Well, guess what? He's not. And that's not my problem. Carla was silent for a moment, probably realizing there was no getting through to me. Megan, on the other hand, finally broke down. She started crying, full-on sobbing, and I'll admit, for a split second I felt bad. But only for a split second. Then I remembered everything she'd done, and that pity went right out the window. Please, Megan sobbed. We don't have anywhere else to go. I don't know what to do. I stared at her, feeling nothing but cold indifference. Figure it out. You made your choice. Now live with it. Carla tried one last time. At least give them enough to cover the rent for a couple of months. They just need time to get back on their feet. Nope, I said, shaking my head. I'm done with all of you. You wanted Jake for Megan, you got him. You deal with the consequences. At that point, I'd had enough. I walked over to the front door and opened it. You can see yourselves out. Carla looked furious, but she didn't say anything. She grabbed Megan by the arm and they both stormed out, Megan still sobbing. As they left, Carla threw one last parting shot over her shoulder. You'll regret this. I just shrugged. Maybe, but I doubt it. When they were gone, I stood there for a moment, just letting it all sink in. It felt good, like I'd finally closed the door on that chapter of my life. They were out of my life, and I wasn't about to let them back in. Later that night, I talked to my mom about everything that had happened. She laughed when I told her how Carla had tried to guilt me into giving them money. You did the right thing, she said. They don't deserve anything from you. And she was right. I didn't owe them a damn thing. Update 2. All right, so after Carla and Megan's failed attempt to guilt-trip me into giving them money, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could finally get some peace. But nah, life wasn't done throwing more nonsense my way. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that people like Carla and Jake don't just disappear quietly. They always find a way to stir up more drama, even when they're in the wrong. A couple weeks go by, and I'm living my life, feeling pretty good about how I handled things. I hadn't heard anything from Jake, Carla, or Megan, which was perfect. Then, one afternoon, my mom calls me and says, "You're not going to believe this." Now, when your mom starts a conversation like that, you know something wild's about to go down. So she tells me that Carla and Megan have been kicked out of my grandparents' house. Yeah, you heard that right. Apparently, after Carla's little visit to me, she went crying to my grandparents, begging them for help. Megan was in full drama queen mode, acting like her life was falling apart, which, I mean, to be fair, it kinda was. But my grandparents weren't having it. They've been dealing with Carla's freeloading for years. She'd been living with them, mooching off their pension, and not doing much to contribute around the house. I guess the straw that broke the camel's back was when they found out that Jake and Megan hadn't been paying rent for months and were facing eviction. My grandparents were furious. They'd always believed Carla's story that Jake was this successful writer who would take care of Megan, and now they were seeing that the whole thing was a lie. They finally had enough and told Carla that if she couldn't figure out how to support herself, she and Megan had to go. So, Carla and Megan got booted out. No more free ride at the grandparents' house. They had to go find their own place, and guess what? They ended up in this tiny rundown apartment in some sketchy neighborhood. Talk about karma hitting hard. My mom was practically laughing as she told me the whole story, and honestly, I couldn't help but laugh too. I mean, this is what they deserved, right? After all the crap they pulled, it was kind of satisfying to see them finally face the consequences of their actions. But the best part? Jake had no idea this was happening. Apparently, Carla and Megan hadn't told him they'd been kicked out, and he was still under the impression that they were living comfortably at my grandparents' house. I'm not sure what their plan was, but clearly, they weren't being honest with each other. Anyway, a few days after my mom's call, I get an email from Jake. Now, this was surprising because after our last conversation, I thought he was done trying to reach out to me. But nope, there he was popping back up in my inbox. The email started off like the others, him apologizing for how things ended, saying he messed up, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, I didn't care about his apologies at this point, but then he started talking about how hard things were for him now. Jake mentioned that he was struggling to find work because apparently his writing career wasn't panning out. Big shocker there, right? He'd been trying to land new clients, but no one was interested in hiring him. He even said he was thinking about going back to his old job, which made me laugh because that was the same job he quit to pursue his passion. Funny how things come full circle. But here's the thing. Jake asked me for advice. Yes, you read that right. The guy who dumped me for my cousin was now asking me for career advice. I had to read the email twice to make sure I wasn't imagining it. He actually wanted my help figuring out what to do next because, according to him, I was always the one who knew how to handle things. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. I mean, after everything he did, he had the audacity to come to me for help. I didn't respond right away because, honestly, I didn't know how to. Part of me wanted to just ignore him, but another part of me thought maybe this was my chance to show him how much he screwed up. So, after thinking it over for a bit, I replied. I kept it short and to the point. I told him that it wasn't my job to fix his problems and that he needed to figure it out on his own. I also reminded him that I wasn't the one who threw away our relationship. He was. I said something like, "You made your choice, Jake, and now you have to live with it." I didn't bother to offer any advice because, frankly, he didn't deserve it. He didn't reply, and I figured that was the end of it. But nope, there was more. A week later, I get another email. This time, it's not from Jake. It's from Megan. She was freaking out because they were officially getting evicted and they had nowhere to go. She asked if I could please reconsider and give them some of Jake's share of the trust fund so they could get back on their feet. She said they'd been struggling ever since they got married and didn't know how they were going to make it without some financial help. Now, I could have been nice. I could have felt sorry for her and handed over some cash to help them out. But after everything they did? Nah, I wasn't feeling generous. So I replied with a simple, "Sorry to hear that, but this isn't my problem. Good luck." I hit send and didn't give it another thought. If they were hoping for a bailout from me, they were going to be disappointed. After that, I heard through the family grapevine that Carla and Megan were scrambling to find somewhere to live. They tried asking my grandparents to take them back, but my grandparents weren't having it. They'd put their foot down, and honestly, I was proud of them for it. It was about time Carla faced some consequences for her freeloading ways. As for Jake, I heard he finally gave up on his writing dreams and went crawling back to his old job. He's probably miserable, but honestly, I don't care. He made his choices and now he's living with them. Me? I'm doing just fine. I moved on, got a new job, and even started dating again. Life's good, and I don't have to deal with their drama anymore. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes karma takes its sweet time, but it always shows up in the end. Update 3. So, after everything that went down with Jake, Carla, and Megan, I figured things would finally settle down. But, of course, that's not how life works when you've got people like them in your orbit. I thought they'd finally get the message, right? Like, stop bothering me, deal with your own problems, and let me live my life. But nope. There was still one last bit of drama waiting to unfold, and honestly, this one took me by surprise. A few months after all the eviction drama, I was pretty much back to normal. I'd gotten back into my work, started hanging out with my friends more, and I was dating again, which felt like a nice change of pace. It felt like I was finally moving on from all the nonsense. But then, out of nowhere, I get a call from my uncle, Carla's brother. Now, my uncle and I had always been cool. He wasn't really involved in the whole Carla and Megan situation, but he knew about it. He's one of those guys who stays out of family drama, but he'll call you if something major is going down. So, when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I knew something was up. I answered, and he immediately goes, "You're not going to believe what Carla did." Here we go again. Apparently, Carla had been spreading all kinds of lies about me to the rest of the family. She'd been telling people that I was the reason Jake and Megan were struggling. According to her, I'd stolen Jake's share of the trust fund. And that's why they couldn't pay rent or make ends meet. She was going around saying that I was this greedy, selfish person who didn't care about family, and that I was ruining Megan's future. Can you believe the nerve? I was furious. Like, I'd put up with a lot of crap from Carla over the years, but this was too much. I wasn't going to let her drag my name through the mud because she didn't want to admit that her daughter married a bum. My uncle told me that most of the family didn't believe her, but some people were starting to wonder if there was any truth to her story. That's when I knew I had to put an end to this once and for all. So, I decided to confront her. I wasn't going to let her keep spreading lies about me behind my back. If she wanted to play the victim, fine, but she wasn't going to do it at my expense. I called her up and told her we needed to talk, face to face. She tried to act all innocent on the phone like she didn't know what I was talking about, but I wasn't falling for it. I told her to meet me at a coffee shop the next day, and to my surprise, she actually agreed. When I got there, Carla was already sitting at a table looking all smug like she'd won some kind of battle. But I wasn't there to play games. I sat down and got straight to the point. "Why are you telling people I stole Jake's money?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. She blinked at me, pretending to be confused. "I don't know what you're talking about, dear. I haven't said anything like that." "Yeah, right." "Cut the crap, Carla," I said. "I know you've been telling people that I took Jake's share of the trust fund. I know you've been blaming me for all the problems Jake and Megan are having, and I'm not going to let you keep spreading those lies. She sighed dramatically, like she was the one being wronged. I'm just trying to look out for my daughter. She's been through so much, and you know that money could have helped them. I stared at her, not believing what I was hearing. Your daughter? The one who married my fiancé behind my back? The one who lied to everyone about Jake being some successful writer? Yeah, she's really been through a lot, hasn't she? Carla's face hardened. You don't understand, do you? Megan is family. You should have helped her. At that point, I couldn't help but laugh. It was just so ridiculous. Help her? After everything you and Megan did to me? You seriously think I owe you anything? Carla leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, like she was trying to intimidate me or something. You think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you've got your life together, you think you can look down on us. But I'm telling you right now, you're going to regret this. I rolled my eyes. I don't regret anything, Carla. You've spent years treating me like garbage, and now you're mad because I finally stood up for myself. You think you can just take whatever you want and walk all over people, but that's not how the world works. She didn't say anything for a moment, just sat there, glaring at me. I could see that she was starting to realize she wasn't going to win this one. Finally, she muttered, You'll regret it when you're all alone. That's when I knew this conversation was over. I stood up and grabbed my bag. You know what, Carla? I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people like you. I walked out of the coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in months. It was like I'd finally closed the door on all the toxic crap she and Megan had been putting me through. And honestly, it felt good. Later that day, I called my uncle and told him what happened. He laughed and said, Carla's always been like that. She's never going to change. He was probably right, but at least I didn't have to deal with her anymore. As for Megan and Jake, I heard through the grapevine that they were still struggling to get by. They'd moved into an even smaller apartment, and Jake was working a dead-end job he hated. Every once in a while, I'd hear from family members that Megan was complaining about how hard things were, but I didn't really care. They made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. Me? I was doing great. I'd moved on from the whole mess, focused on my career, and started seeing someone new. Life was good, and I wasn't going to let people like Carla or Megan bring me down anymore. If they wanted to keep playing the victim, that was their problem, not mine. And that's how it all ended. No dramatic resolution, no big apology from Carla or Megan. Just me moving on with my life, and them still stuck in the mess they created. Sometimes, that's the best kind of ending you can hope for. Mom married 3 weeks after Dad's death, moved in her new husband and his kid. Now, 15 years later, she wants me back. I remember the day my parents sat me and my sister Emma down to tell us they were getting divorced. I was only 7, but even at that age, you can feel when things are falling apart. Emma was 9, and she had this tough girl act going on, trying not to cry, but I could tell she was hurting. We both were. They gave us the whole "it's not your fault" speech, like somehow hearing that would make it less crappy. It didn't. After the divorce, things were rough. We stayed with Mom, and she did her best to keep life going, but it was obvious she was struggling. She worked long hours, and when she was home, she was always tired or just not interested in spending time with us. We went from being a family to just 3 people living in the same house. It was like Dad took the glue that held everything together when he left. A couple of years went by, and that's when Brian came into the picture. I wasn't really paying attention at first. I mean, we were just kids, and it's not like we had a say in Mom's dating life. One day, though, she introduced him to us over dinner. Brian was a nice enough guy, I guess, but he was kind of quiet and awkward, like he didn't know how to talk to kids. I remember sitting there trying to figure out what was so special about him. But the real kicker wasn't Brian. It was Mason, his baby son. Mason was only a few months old when Mom started seeing Brian, and she instantly became obsessed with him. I'm talking full-on 24/7 mom mode, like she had hit the reset button on parenting. Emma and I just stood there watching it happen like, what the hell is going on? She started acting like Mason was her own kid. I get that Brian was a package deal or whatever, but it felt like we got pushed aside for this baby that wasn't even ours. I remember one night when I was sitting at the table doing my homework, and Mason was crying. Mom was all over him, soothing him, rocking him, the whole thing. I couldn't help but think, where was all that attention when we needed it? Mom and Brian got serious pretty fast. It wasn't long before she started dropping hints about us all being a family and how she was so happy. We were going to be a part of this new chapter in her life. She didn't ask how we felt about it, though. Emma was old enough to be mad about it, but I think I was more confused than anything. One minute it's just me, Emma, and Mom, and the next we've got this stranger and his baby moving into our house. It felt like everything was changing, and we had no control over any of it. When Mom and Brian got engaged, things got even weirder. I remember she was super excited, like it was the best thing that had ever happened to her. She started planning the wedding right away. I don't even think she asked us what we thought about it. It was like we were just along for the ride, and our opinions didn't matter. Then, right before the wedding, my dad died in a car accident. It was like the worst timing possible. We were devastated. Emma was a wreck, and I didn't know how to handle it either. Dad may not have been around much after the divorce, but he was still our dad. Losing him hit us hard. You'd think, under the circumstances, Mom would have put the wedding on hold, right? Give us time to grieve, maybe? But nope. The wedding went ahead as planned. She didn't even hesitate. I'll never forget how cold that felt. She was all smiles, planning her big day with Brian, while Emma and I were barely holding it together. I remember thinking, is this really happening? Is this what's important to her right now? On the day of the wedding, it felt like we were in some alternate reality. I mean, here we were, just weeks after our dad died, standing there in fancy clothes watching Mom marry this guy. I don't think either of us said a word the whole day. The ceremony was just weird. Brian's family was there, cooing over Mason like he was the star of the show. Meanwhile, Emma and I were trying not to cry. That's when the real shift happened. After the wedding, Mom told us, and this still blows my mind, she told us that if we wanted to keep seeing Dad's parents, our grandparents, they'd have to include Mason too. Can you believe that? She straight up said that we couldn't spend time with our own grandparents unless Mason was part of it. Emma lost her mind when she heard that. I think she yelled at Mom for a solid 5 minutes, and honestly, I don't blame her. It was like she was trying to erase our dad completely and replace him with Brian and Mason. Our grandparents tried to reason with her. They offered to take just me and Emma for weekends, to do stuff like we used to, and they even said they'd pay for everything. But Mom wasn't having it. She said that if they wanted to see us, they had to see Mason too. I'll never forget the look on Emma's face when she heard that. It was like the final straw for her. She was done. Mom's reasoning was that we were all a family now, and Mason was a part of that. But here's the thing. He wasn't our family. He wasn't Dad's son, and he never met Dad. Why did he have to be included in everything related to Dad's side of the family? It didn't make sense to us, and no matter how much we tried to explain it, Mom just didn't care. Emma and I started distancing ourselves after that. We didn't want to be around this fake family dynamic that Mom was trying to force on us. It felt like Mason was her priority now, and we were just these extra kids she had to deal with. It was like we were being phased out of her life, little by little, and there wasn't much we could do about it. Looking back, I realized that was the beginning of the end for our relationship with Mom. She was so focused on building this new life with Brian and Mason that she didn't notice we were slipping away. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. Either way, things were never the same after that. After the wedding, things got even more awkward between me, Emma, and Mom. It was like she expected us to magically adjust to this new life with Brian and Mason, like we could just flip a switch and start feeling like one big happy family. Spoiler, that didn't happen. Not even close. See, Mom started pushing this idea of family unity hard. She kept going on about how we needed to treat Mason like he was our little brother, which just felt wrong. I mean, yeah, Mason was a cute kid, but he wasn't our brother. He wasn't Dad's kid. He was just Brian's son. I don't know if Mom thought we'd forget about our real dad, or if she really believed we'd bond with Mason like he'd been there from the start, but that's not how things work. I remember one specific day that really hit me hard. It was Dad's birthday, a day that was always kind of sacred for us. Even after the divorce, Emma and I would spend it with Dad's family, our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who actually knew him and loved him. We'd go to his favorite restaurant, sometimes visit his grave, and just share memories. It was our way of keeping his memory alive. But this year, Mom decided things were going to be different. She sat us down a week before and said, "This year, we're celebrating your dad's birthday together, here at home, with Mason and Brian." I could feel my stomach drop. I was like, what? That was our time with Dad's side of the family? Mason didn't even know our dad, and Brian barely knew him. It felt like a slap in the face. Emma spoke up first, and she wasn't subtle about it. She said, "Why would Mason be there? This has nothing to do with him." Mom shot back with, "Mason is part of this family now, and it's important we all honor your father together. We don't exclude people in this family." I wanted to argue, but at the same time, I knew where it was going. Emma and I had been having the same fight with her for months. No matter what we said, she always twisted it into us being selfish or not wanting to include Mason. It was frustrating because it wasn't that we hated Mason or anything. We just didn't want to force him into something that wasn't his. And let's be real, It was more about us not wanting our dad's memory turned into some awkward blended family event that felt fake. So I tried to be calm and explain it. I said, Mom, Dad's birthday has always been a thing with his side of the family. They were there for us when he died, and it means a lot to keep that going. Mason doesn't need to be there. She looked at me like I'd just said the worst thing ever. Lucas, you don't get to decide who is part of this family. If you want to honor your dad, you do it with all of us or not at all. At that moment, I just knew there was no winning this argument. No matter what we said, she was going to make this about including Mason and Brian, whether it made sense or not. So we did the only thing we could. We stopped trying to argue. We figured it was better to go along with it for now and then do our own thing later. The day of Dad's birthday came, and I swear, it was one of the most uncomfortable days of my life. Mom cooked this big dinner, and we all sat around the table like it was some kind of family reunion. Brian tried to make conversation with us about Dad, like he had any idea who he was. It was cringy. The whole time I was just staring at my plate, counting down the minutes until I could leave. And then there was Mason. Poor kid didn't know what was going on. He was just running around, being a typical 3-year-old, completely oblivious to the fact that this day had nothing to do with him. I couldn't even be mad at him. It wasn't his fault, but it still felt wrong that he was there. After dinner, Mom pulled out this birthday cake. She had put Happy Birthday Dad on it, and as we lit the candles, she made all of us, including Mason, stand around and sing Happy Birthday. I remember standing there, my mouth barely moving, trying to keep it together. It felt like she was rewriting history, like she was trying to force this fake narrative that Mason and Brian were part of Dad's life somehow, but they weren't. They never were. Emma had it worse. She couldn't handle it at all. Halfway through the night, she stormed out of the house, and I didn't blame her. I stayed behind because I didn't want to make things even more dramatic, but I wished I'd left with her. After that birthday, things just kept going downhill. Mom kept pushing Mason into more and more of our traditions, and every time we tried to push back, she'd accuse us of being cold or heartless. She'd say things like, Mason's just a little boy. How can you be so cruel to him? It was like she refused to understand what we were really upset about. It wasn't about Mason. It was about the fact that she was replacing our dad's memory with this new life she was building, and we were expected to go along with it, no questions asked. That's when I realized something that stuck with me for a long time. It wasn't just about blending families for Mom. It was about control. She wanted to control how we remembered Dad, how we lived our lives, and how we fit into her new version of what a family should look like. And if we didn't fall in line, we were the bad guys. I didn't know how to deal with it back then. I just knew I was angry. Angry at her for forcing Mason into everything. Angry at Brian for going along with it. And angry at myself for not standing up to her more. But what could I do? I was just a kid trying to hold on to whatever little bit of my old life was left. And the more I tried to hold on, the more it felt like it was slipping away. That year changed everything. Emma and I started distancing ourselves more and more from Mom and her new family. And while it wasn't the breaking point yet, it was the beginning of us realizing that things were never going back to the way they were. Things kept getting worse after Dad's birthday. It felt like no matter what Emma or I did, Mom was determined to shove this new family down our throats. I don't think she understood, or maybe she didn't care, how badly all this blending was affecting us. We couldn't just snap our fingers and accept Brian and Mason as replacements for Dad, but she acted like we were the ones being difficult. By the time I turned 18, I had pretty much reached my limit. The house didn't even feel like my home anymore. It was like Brian had taken over, and everything revolved around him and Mason. Brian wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't my dad. He had his own way of running things, and I couldn't help but feel like an outsider in what used to be my house. Every decision, every rule, it was all Brian says this, or Brian thinks that. I didn't care what Brian thought. I just wanted my life back, the one where my opinions actually mattered. One day I was in my room, packing up some of my stuff, getting ready to move in with my girlfriend Jess. I wasn't leaving because I didn't love my mom. I did. But I needed space. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't breathe with everything going on in that house. Jess and I had been planning this move for months, and I was finally ready to get out. Mom came into my room while I was packing. I could tell from the look on her face that she wasn't happy about it. "So, you're really going through with this?" she asked, crossing her arms. I nodded. "Yeah, Mom, it's time." She stood there for a minute, not saying anything, just watching me throw stuff into boxes. Then she sighed and said, "I don't understand why you're running away from your family." That word, family, hit me hard. I stopped what I was doing and turned to her. I'm not running away from family, I said, but this doesn't feel like my family anymore. Her face changed. She looked like I had slapped her. What are you talking about? Of course this is your family. We're all in this together. I couldn't believe she still didn't get it. Mom, ever since you married Brian, everything has been about him and Mason. It's like Emma and I don't even matter anymore. We're just here. You're trying to replace Dad with them, and I can't deal with it. She shook her head, frustrated. I'm not trying to replace your father. I just want us all to be a family. Why can't you see that? I didn't know how to explain it to her. It wasn't that I didn't want a family. I just didn't want this forced version of it. I don't feel like I'm part of this family, I said, trying to stay calm. I feel like I'm stuck in someone else's life. Mom looked like she was about to argue again, but then she sighed and sat down on the edge of my bed. I just want you to be happy, she said quietly. I want us all to be happy. I know, Mom, I said, softening a little. But I'm not happy here. I need space. I need to figure things out on my own. We sat in silence for a minute. I could tell she didn't want me to go, but at the same time she knew I had made up my mind. After a while she stood up and left the room without saying anything else. I went back to packing, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt her, but I couldn't keep living like this. Moving in with Jess felt like a breath of fresh air. I finally had my own space, a place where I could be myself without all the drama. Jess understood what I was going through, and she supported me every step of the way. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually relax. But, of course, things weren't quiet for long. About a week after I moved out, Mom called me. She wasn't happy. She said I hadn't been around enough to see Mason, that he missed me, and I needed to make more of an effort to include him in my life. I couldn't believe it. Even after I left, she was still pushing this whole Mason is your brother thing. It wasn't that I hated the kid. I didn't. But I didn't see him as my brother, and I wasn't going to pretend I did just to make Mom feel better. I tried to explain that I needed space, that I was focusing on my own life now, but she didn't want to hear it. She just kept talking about how Mason was hurt and how I was abandoning my family. The guilt trips were relentless, but I wasn't caving this time. I'd finally gotten out, and I wasn't going back. Things stayed tense after that. I didn't go back to the house, and I didn't visit much. Emma had already started distancing herself, too. She wasn't as vocal about it as I was, but she felt the same way. It was like we were slowly being pushed out of Mom's life, and Mason was taking our place. It hurt, but what could we do? Mom had made her choice, and we had made ours. It was quiet for a few months after that. I thought maybe we'd finally hit some sort of balance, Mom with her new family, and me with my new life. But then, out of nowhere, she showed up at my job. I was in the middle of a shift when she walked in. I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't there to chat. She was pissed. I wasn't sure what had set her off this time, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. We need to talk, she said, crossing her arms and glaring at me. I sighed. Mom, I'm at work. Can't this wait? No, it can't, she snapped. I'm tired of you ignoring your family. Here we go again. I tried to keep my voice calm. I'm not ignoring my family. I've been busy. Busy? Too busy to see your own brother? She shot back. I clenched my jaw. Mason is not my brother. That did it. Mom's face turned red, and I could see her hands shaking. How dare you say that? I raised him like he was my own son. He is your brother, and you're treating him like he doesn't even exist. I had had enough. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into something I didn't believe. Look, I didn't ask for this, okay? I didn't ask for you to remarry or bring Mason into our lives. I'm not saying I hate him, but he's not my brother. He's Brian's kid, and I don't have to include him in my life if I don't want to. Mom stood there, staring at me like I was a stranger. I can't believe you've turned into this person, she said, her voice low. I thought I raised you better than this. I didn't know what else to say. I just looked at her and said, maybe you didn't raise me at all. Update 1. After that confrontation with Mom at my job, things between us went from bad to worse. I didn't think they could, but here we were. The tension had been building for years, but now it was like we were in this silent war. She wasn't talking to me, and I wasn't making any effort to reach out either. It felt like something had broken that couldn't be fixed, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to try and mend it anymore. A couple weeks went by, and I thought maybe we'd just leave things where they were. I didn't mind the silence. I was finally getting some space, and I could focus on my own life without all that family drama weighing me down. But of course, it wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Mom had a way of pulling you back in whether you wanted to or not. One night, I was at home with Jess. just relaxing after a long day, when my phone started blowing up with texts. It was Mom. She hadn't texted me since our fight, so I figured this wasn't going to be anything good. I didn't even want to open them at first, but the notifications just kept coming, so I finally gave in. The texts were long, really long. Like, I had to scroll for a minute to get through all of it. She was ranting about how I'd abandoned the family, and how Mason was asking where I was and why I wasn't visiting anymore. She said I was hurting him by not being around, and that I was being cruel to a little kid who had done nothing wrong. I just sat there staring at my phone, completely drained. It was the same argument, over and over again. She couldn't accept that I didn't see Mason as my brother. She refused to let it go, and now she was making it sound like I was some villain for not playing along with her perfect family fantasy. I didn't even know how to respond. Jess, sitting next to me, saw my face and asked, "Is it your mom again?" I nodded. "Yeah, she's saying the same stuff, that I'm being unfair to Mason, that I'm hurting the family." Jess rolled her eyes. "She doesn't get it, does she?" "Nope," I said, tossing my phone on the table. "She's never going to get it." Jess put her hand on my shoulder. "You don't owe her anything. You've done everything you could to explain how you feel. If she doesn't want to listen, that's on her." I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. There was always that nagging guilt. Even though I knew Mom was in the wrong, part of me still felt like I was the bad guy. I wasn't trying to hurt Mason, and I didn't want to make him feel left out. But at the same time, I couldn't keep pretending like this whole situation was normal. A few days later, things took a turn. Mom started calling me, and I ignored the first couple of calls, figuring she was just going to keep pushing the same argument. But then, she left a voicemail that caught me off guard. In the voicemail, she wasn't just upset anymore. She was angry, like really angry. Her voice was shaking, and she said something along the lines of, "If you want to be part of this family, you need to step up and stop acting like a child. Mason is your brother, whether you like it or not, and if you keep ignoring him, you're going to lose your family. You're better than this, Lucas. I didn't raise you to be so selfish." That last part really got under my skin. Selfish? I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to balance what I needed with what Mom wanted. I had bent over backwards to make things work, but now I was being called selfish because I didn't want to play along anymore. It felt like everything I had done for her, for our family, didn't matter. All she cared about was Mason and her version of the family she'd built around him. I played the voicemail for Jess later that night, and she just shook her head. "She's trying to guilt trip you again," she said. "You don't have to listen to that." I knew she was right. I had been guilt tripped for years, but it was like a reflex now. Part of me still felt like I owed Mom something, even when she was clearly in the wrong. A few days passed, and then something happened that really pushed me over the edge. Mom showed up at Jess's apartment. She didn't even call or text me beforehand, just showed up at the front door demanding to talk. Jess opened the door, and I could hear Mom's voice before I even saw her. She was upset, and she wasn't going to leave until she got what she wanted. Jess came back to get me, looking a little shaken. "Your mom's here," she said. She's kind of freaking out." I didn't want to deal with it. I really didn't. But I couldn't just leave her standing out there either, so I went to the door. The second she saw me, she started in. "We need to talk. Now," she said, her voice sharp. I didn't even invite her in. I just stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "What do you want, Mom?" She crossed her arms and glared at me. "You need to stop this. This is ridiculous, Lucas. You've cut off your own family for no reason." "I didn't cut off my family," I said, trying to stay calm. "I just don't want to be part of something that doesn't feel real." Mom threw her hands up. "Mason is real. Brian is real. This is your family whether you want to accept it or not." "I don't care about that," I shot back. "You're trying to force something that I don't believe in. Mason isn't my brother, and Brian isn't my dad. I'm not going to pretend like they are just to make you happy." That's when she said it, the thing that really made me see red. "Well, if you can't accept them as family, then maybe you don't deserve to be part of this family either." I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she just said. I couldn't believe it. She was willing to throw me away because I wouldn't fall in line with her new family. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just turned around and went back inside, closing the door behind me. I could hear her shouting outside, but I didn't care anymore. Something had snapped inside me. All the guilt, all the pressure, it was gone. If she wanted to cut me off, fine. I wasn't going to keep fighting for a place in a family that didn't even feel like mine. That night, I blocked her number. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Update 2. After I blocked Mom's number, things went quiet. Really quiet. I thought maybe she'd try to get in touch through other people. Maybe Jess, maybe Emma, but nothing. It was like a switch had flipped, and just like that, the drama stopped. At first, it felt weird. I'd been so used to the constant pressure, the guilt trips, and the manipulation that when it all stopped, I didn't know what to do with myself. But slowly, the silence started to feel like a relief. I spent a lot more time with Jess, focusing on our life together. For once, I wasn't carrying around all this weight from my family. Jess and I could actually enjoy our time together without me constantly checking my phone or stressing out about the latest thing my mom had done or said. It felt like I was finally living my own life, and not the one Mom had tried to force me into. But of course, peace never lasts forever. One day, a few months after everything went down, I got a message from my aunt, Mom's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, but we'd always gotten along pretty well. She didn't take sides during all the drama with Mom, which I appreciated. The message was short and kind of vague. It just said, "Hey, can we talk? It's important." I knew something was up, so I called her. She answered on the first ring, and the first thing she said was, "Lucas, have you talked to your mom lately?" I sighed. "No, I haven't. We're not really in contact anymore." There was a pause on the other end. I could tell she was trying to figure out how to word whatever she was about to say. "Well, I don't want to get in the middle of things, but you should probably know that your mom's been telling everyone that you and Emma abandoned her and Mason." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Here we go again. "She's saying we abandoned her?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yeah," my aunt said softly. "She's telling people that she tried to reach out to you both, but you've been ignoring her, that you're refusing to be part of the family and she doesn't know what to do." I couldn't help it. I laughed, even though none of this was funny. "Of course, she's the victim now. Classic." "I don't know all the details, Lucas," my aunt said, her voice a little defensive. "I'm just telling you what she's been saying. I didn't want to get involved, but I thought you should know." "Thanks for letting me know," I said, feeling my anger start to build again. "But she's twisting the truth. She cut us off the second we didn't play by her rules. She wanted us to accept Mason as family, and when we didn't, she wrote us off." There was a long pause on her end, like she wasn't sure how to respond. Finally, she said, "Well, I thought you should hear it from me, rather than through the grapevine." "I appreciate it," I said, trying to keep my frustration out of my voice. "But honestly, I don't think there's anything left to fix." After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a while, just thinking. It was hard to wrap my head around the fact that, after everything, Mom was still trying to make us out to be the bad guys. It was like she couldn't handle the idea that she'd pushed us away, so instead she flipped the script and made it look like we were the ones who'd abandoned her. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about Mason or Brian or any of the family drama. This was about control. Mom had always needed to be in control of everything. She needed to control the narrative, control the family dynamic, control how we remembered Dad. And when Emma and I stopped letting her control us, she lost it. A few days after the call with my aunt, I decided to reach out to Emma. We hadn't talked much since everything blew up, but I knew she was going through the same stuff I was. We set up a time to meet for coffee, and when we finally sat down, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Talking to her felt different now, like we were on the same page in a way we hadn't been before. "I talked to Aunt Sarah," I said, after we'd settled into our seats. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What did she say?" I told her about the conversation, about how Mom was telling people we'd abandoned her. Emma rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might get stuck. "Of course she's playing the victim," Emma said. "She always does. It's never her fault." "I know," I said, shaking my head. "But it still pisses me off. Like, how can she not see that she did this? She's the one who pushed us away." "She doesn't want to see it," Emma said, taking a sip of her coffee. "She's never going to admit she's wrong. In her mind, she's this perfect mom who's just trying to hold the family together, and we're the ungrateful kids who don't appreciate her." That hit me harder than I expected. Perfect mom? Was that how she saw herself? I guess it made sense. In her world, she probably thought she was doing everything right, that she was creating this happy, blended family. But the reality was so far from that. "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "I've tried everything. I've explained how I feel. I've tried setting boundaries, and nothing works. She just ignores it and keeps pushing her version of things." Emma nodded. "Same here. I've been trying to distance myself for years, but every time I do, she pulls the poor me card and makes me feel guilty." We sat in silence for a while, both of us just processing everything. It felt good to talk to Emma about it, though. It made me realize I wasn't alone in all this. We were both dealing with the same thing, and neither of us had the answers. But at least we had each other. I guess we just have to accept that this is who she is, Emma said finally. She's not going to change. She's always going to try and control us, and we have to decide how much of that we're willing to put up with. I nodded. Yeah, I guess so. We finished our coffee, and as we left the cafe, I felt a weird sense of closure. I wasn't happy about how things had turned out with Mom, but I wasn't as angry anymore. I'd done everything I could to make things work, but sometimes, no matter how hard you try, people just won't change. And that's not on you. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could move forward without the weight of all this family drama on my shoulders. Maybe things with Mom would never be the way they used to be, but I had my own life to live now. And I wasn't going to let her control that anymore.
I never thought my life would take such a turn. It wasn't long ago that I believed in love, in trust, and in the future I had with Kyle. But now, as I look back, I realize how wrong I was. The story of how my marriage unraveled is one of deceit, betrayal, and heartbreak. And it all started with a single decision: to let Kyle into my life. When I first met Kyle, he seemed perfect. He was 4 years younger than me, running a small cafe in Los Angeles, full of dreams and ambition. His eyes would light up whenever he talked about his plans for the future, how he wanted to expand the cafe, make it a hotspot in the city, and achieve financial success. I worked at a credit union, and Kyle had come in as a client. At the time, I was handling his finances, helping him secure loans for his business. We became close during that period, and it wasn't long before our professional relationship turned personal. We started dating after a few meetings outside of work. He seemed so caring, so full of life. I had almost given up on marriage in my mid-30s, but Kyle reignited a spark in me. He wasn't just a man with a vision for his business. He had a vision for us. Or so I thought. Within 6 months, we were married, and I thought I had found the happiness I had been waiting for. But the first cracks in our relationship began to appear shortly after we moved in together. We found a modest apartment, nothing too extravagant, but it was enough for the two of us. I had no complaints about our living situation, but I could tell Kyle wasn't entirely happy. He had always talked about wanting to live a luxurious life in LA, surrounded by wealth and success. It was subtle at first, but over time, his dissatisfaction with our lifestyle became more apparent. Still, I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind. I convinced myself that once his cafe took off, things would get better. We would have more money, more freedom, and Kyle would be happy again. But deep down, I knew something was off. There were moments when his eyes would linger too long on flashy cars, expensive homes, and the lives of people who had far more than we did. I tried to dismiss it as simple envy, but there was something darker lurking beneath. Then came the day that changed everything. My father, who had been living alone since my mother passed away, had taken a fall on the stairs. He was in his late 60s and still living in the high-rise condo my parents had bought many years ago. I had been visiting him less frequently since I married Kyle, but after his fall, I knew I had to step in. My father was fiercely independent, but I could tell he was struggling, even though he tried to hide it. When I told Kyle about my father's condition, I suggested that we move in with him to help out. It seemed like the right thing to do. After all, my father was getting older, and his health was deteriorating. I expected Kyle to resist the idea. After all, who wants to live with their in-laws? But to my surprise, he agreed almost immediately. "Let's do it," Kyle said, his face lighting up in a way that made me uneasy. "It'll be good for us, and it's close to my cafe too." I didn't think too much of it at the time. I was just relieved that Kyle was on board. We moved into my father's high-rise condo, and for a while, everything seemed fine. My father was grateful for the help, and Kyle appeared to be getting along with him. On weekends, I would drive my father around to the places he wanted to visit, and Kyle would take care of the house while we were gone. It felt like a good arrangement, one that benefited everyone. But then, slowly, things began to shift. Kyle's cafe wasn't doing as well as he had hoped. The income wasn't steady, and he became more reliant on my father's financial support. My father, who had rental income from other properties, was generous, offering to help Kyle with his business. But Kyle started to change. He began to distance himself from the responsibilities of the household. When my father became bedridden after another fall, Kyle's reluctance to help became more noticeable. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe Kyle was just stressed about the cafe, that he was tired from trying to make ends meet. But it wasn't just stress. It was something else. Kyle started to avoid caring for my father altogether. Even though he had agreed to live with us, to help out when I wasn't home, he started making excuses. "I have too much work at the cafe," he would say, or "I'm just not cut out for caregiving." I could feel the tension growing, but I didn't know what to do. My father had always been kind to Kyle, and it hurt to see him neglected in his time of need. I had taken on all the household responsibilities, cleaning, cooking, and caring for my father after long days at work. Kyle barely lifted a finger, and it made me angry, but I was too afraid to confront him. I didn't want to risk our marriage. Then, one day, I came home to find that my father's lunch, component placement which I had prepared in the morning, was still untouched in the kitchen. My heart sank. I rushed to his room, fearing the worst. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, kneeling beside him. He smiled weakly and nodded. "I'm fine, Sophia. Don't worry, I didn't feel hungry today." I knew he was lying. He was trying to cover for Kyle, who had clearly neglected to take care of him. I wanted to confront Kyle, but I bit my tongue. Maybe this was just a one-time thing, I told myself. Maybe Kyle had genuinely forgotten, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. As the weeks passed, Kyle's neglect became more frequent. He stopped helping with my father altogether, and whenever I asked him to do something, he would snap at me. "Why do I have to take care of your dad? I never agreed to this," he yelled one night when I asked him to serve my father's dinner. "But you did agree," I reminded him, my voice trembling. "You said we would do this together." Kyle scoffed, rolling his eyes. "That was before I realized how much work it would be. This isn't my responsibility, Sophia. I didn't sign up to be a caregiver." His words cut deep, but I didn't argue. I was exhausted from working all day and then coming home to take care of my father. I didn't have the energy to fight with Kyle, but I couldn't ignore the growing resentment that was building inside me. Then, everything changed when my father passed away. It was sudden and unexpected, and I was devastated. My father had been my rock, the one constant in my life, and now he was gone. In the days following his death, I was overwhelmed with grief. But Kyle didn't seem to care. The night after the funeral, Kyle came to me with a smug look on his face. "So, now that your dad's gone, what happens to the high-rise condo?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes gleaming with greed. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" Kyle shrugged. "Well, it's yours now, right? I think it's only fair that I get it." My heart raced as I realized what he was saying. "You want my father's condo?" Kyle nodded, a cold smile spreading across his face. "I've been patient, Sophia. I've put up with a lot, and I think I deserve something in return." I felt sick to my stomach. "Kyle, this isn't about you. My father just died." But he wasn't listening. "Look, my parents are selling their house to move here, and they'll need a place to stay. The condo is perfect for them. Just hand it over, and we'll be done with all this." I couldn't believe his audacity. "You want me to give my father's condo to your parents?" Kyle's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Yes. And if you don't, we're getting a divorce." The words hung in the air like a threat. I felt a wave of disbelief and anger wash over me. This was the man I had married, the man I thought loved me. And now, he was revealing that all he cared about was the inheritance. Something inside me snapped. "Fine," I said, my voice calm but full of resolve. "Let's get a divorce." Kyle blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, what?" "You heard me?" I said, standing up. I won't stay married to someone who only cared about my father's money. You can have your divorce, but you're not getting the condo. Kyle tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. I had already made up my mind. Over the next few days, I took legal action. I had sold the condo to my father's friend, Mr. Simpson, before Kyle could get his hands on it. When Kyle found out, he was furious. "You can't do this," he screamed. But it was too late. Mr. Simpson, who also happened to be a lawyer, made sure that Kyle had no legal claim to the property. Kyle tried to fight it, but in the end he lost. Not just the condo, but everything. In the months that followed, Kyle's life spiraled out of control. His cafe went under, and he was left with nothing. Meanwhile, I moved on. I sold the family home and bought a small apartment, starting fresh. It took time to heal from the betrayal, but I eventually found peace. My father had always taught me to stand up for myself, and in the end, that's what I did. I may have lost Kyle, but I gained something far more important: my freedom. And as for Kyle? Well, the last I heard, he was struggling to find work, bouncing from one job to the next. His parents, who had been so eager to move into the condo, were now renting a small apartment, scraping by on part-time jobs. Looking back, I realized that everything happens for a reason. Kyle came into my life, and for a while, I believed in him. But the truth always comes out in the end, and when it did, I was ready to face it head-on. Now, I'm free to live my life on my own terms, just as my father would have wanted. And that's all that matters.
How could you forget something so basic, Clara? Emily would never be so careless. Beatrice's sharp tone cut through the soft hum of the kitchen fan, her words wrapping around me like a noose. I paused mid-stir, gripping the wooden spoon tighter as my chest tightened. The pot of soup simmered on the stove, its aroma filling the air. But all I could smell was the bitterness in her words. My name is Clara Mason. I'm 32, a nurse, and for the past 3 weeks, the caregiver to my recovering mother-in-law. When Beatrice had surgery last month, I moved into her house, balancing my shifts at the hospital with endless nights by her side. I wanted to help, not out of obligation, but because it felt like the right thing to do. I hoped it might soften the years of cold distance between us. But no matter how much I tried, it seemed my efforts were always invisible, overshadowed by Emily, her perfect daughter, who breezed in once a week, smiling for the camera before leaving just as quickly. I didn't know how to respond. My throat felt dry, and the words I wanted to say caught like thorns in my chest. Beatrice turned back to the table, muttering something under her breath, her disapproval settling over the room like a heavy fog. Emily, of course, was nowhere to be found. She was already running late for her weekly appearance. And yet, Beatrice spoke of her as if she were the one standing here, ladle in hand, taking care of her every need. Careless. That word felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. I had given up everything for the past 3 weeks, canceled plans, traded shifts, even missed my anniversary dinner with Ben, all to be here. And for what? To be labeled careless because I hadn't added enough salt to the soup? Meanwhile, Emily could float in for an hour, snap a selfie by Beatrice's bedside, and walk out with all the credit. I stared into the pot, my hand trembling slightly as I stirred. Anger began to simmer, bubbling just below the surface. It wasn't just Beatrice's words. It was the smugness Emily exuded in every moment of her carefully orchestrated visits. She knew exactly how to frame herself as the devoted daughter, and she knew I wouldn't fight back. At least not until now. Just as I opened my mouth to defend myself, the front door creaked open, and Emily strolled in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Smells good in here," she chirped, holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and her phone in the other, as though she'd just dropped by to brighten everyone's day. She glanced at me briefly, her smile lingering a second too long, then turned her attention to Beatrice. "How's my favorite patient today?" she cooed, leaning down to kiss her mother on the cheek. Beatrice's face lit up, her earlier frustration with me vanishing like a puff of smoke. "Emily, sweetheart," You're just in time. I was telling Clara how important it is to pay attention to the little things. Not that she'd understand, she added with a pointed glance in my direction. Emily set the flowers on the counter and let out a soft laugh. Oh, Mom, I'm sure Clara's doing her best, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. Don't worry, Clara. Taking care of Mom isn't easy. I've been learning that myself. I clenched my jaw, the words hanging on the tip of my tongue, begging to be said. But Emily was already moving, pulling her phone out for what I knew was coming next. She posed next to Beatrice, leaning in with a radiant smile as her camera clicked. Just want to capture these precious moments, she said, her voice light, as if she hadn't just stolen the spotlight from everything I'd been working tirelessly to hold together. As Emily scrolled through her phone, probably selecting the best filter to enhance her devoted daughter persona, Beatrice sighed contentedly. It's so nice to have both my girls here, she said, her gaze lingering on Emily. Though I'll admit, Emily always knows just how to make me feel special. My grip tightened on the ladle, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Both her girls? Special? I had spent the last 3 nights waking up every 2 hours to help Beatrice shift positions, prepare her medication, and ensure she was comfortable. Meanwhile, Emily's contribution amounted to curated snapshots and vague reassurances that she was always thinking of Mom. Mom, Emily began, her tone casually breezy. I was actually thinking of bringing you that herbal tea you love next week. You know, the one from that little shop downtown? It's just been so busy at work, but I'll make time. Oh, Emily, that sounds wonderful, Beatrice exclaimed, her eyes practically glowing with pride. You're always so thoughtful. I couldn't stop myself this time. Thoughtful? I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended. Both Beatrice and Emily turned to me, Beatrice's brows knitting together in confusion. She drops by once a week to take a few photos and then disappears. I've been here every single day, doing everything I can to make sure you're comfortable. Emily's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider, but her eyes flashed with something colder. Clara, she said, her voice calm and measured, I didn't realize this was a competition. We're all doing our part in our own way. Some more than others, I muttered under my breath, turning back to the stove. I could feel the tension in the room shift, but I wasn't about to let her patronizing tone get the last word. The moment the words left my mouth, regret washed over me. Even though I was right, I hated that I'd let my frustration spill over, that I'd stooped to making it sound like I was keeping score. It wasn't who I wanted to be, no matter how unfair things felt. Later that evening, I slipped into the guest room, shutting the door quietly behind me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my phone already in my hand. Ben picked up on the second ring, his voice warm but distracted. Hey, everything okay? No, I said, the word tumbling out before I could stop it. I'm exhausted, Ben. I've been doing everything for your mom, everything, and she doesn't even notice. Emily walks in for 10 minutes with flowers and a fake smile, and suddenly she's the perfect daughter. Ben sighed heavily on the other end, the sound crackling through the speaker. Clara, you know how my mom is. She's always been like this. You can't take it personally. I know she's like this, I snapped, my voice sharper than I meant. But that doesn't make it easier. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be here, day in and day out, and still be invisible? I stopped, swallowing the lump in my throat. I just needed you to understand. Ben's voice softened, a hint of concern cutting through his usual practicality. Clara, maybe it's time to take a break. You've done more than enough. You've done everything, honestly. Why don't you come home for a week? Let Emily step up for once. I miss you, and you need to take care of yourself too. His words caught me off guard, the knot in my chest loosening slightly. The thought of going home, of sleeping in my own bed and being with Ben, was so tempting it almost hurt. But then I thought of Beatrice, her frailty, her stubbornness, and the nagging guilt in my stomach returned. I don't know, I said quietly. What if she needs me? She'll manage, Ben said firmly. You've been more than generous, Clara. It's okay to step back. You're not a bad person for putting yourself first for once. Ben and I lived 2 hours away in a small apartment we'd made our home over the last 5 years. When Beatrice's surgery was scheduled, I'd offered to move in temporarily to help with her recovery. Ben had wanted to be there too. He adored his mom despite her quirks, but his job was at a critical point, with deadlines he couldn't ignore. He'd called every day to check in, always asking how I was holding up, but I knew it weighed on him that he couldn't be here to share the burden. As much as I missed him, I couldn't blame him. He was doing the best he could, just like I was. I sighed, gripping the phone a little tighter. I don't know, Ben, I said finally. It's not that I don't want to come home, I do. I miss you, and I'm exhausted. But I can't just leave her like this. She still needs someone here. There was a brief silence on the other end before Ben spoke again, his voice calm but firm. I get it, Clara. You care about her, even if she doesn't always show it. Just think about it, okay? You've done so much already. It's not selfish to take care of yourself, too. I'll think about it, I said quietly, my throat tightening. I promise. It felt like the right thing to say, even though I wasn't sure if I could really let myself walk away. The next morning, I found Beatrice in the living room, sitting upright in her chair with the television on low. She didn't look up as I entered, her attention fixed on a weather report. I hesitated, wondering if I should start the conversation with a simple, "Good morning." But before I could speak, she turned to me with a pointed look. "Clara," she said, her tone already laced with irritation. I couldn't help but notice how late dinner was last night. It's not good for my digestion to eat that late, you know. I blinked, taken aback. Dinner was ready as soon as Emily left. I thought we agreed. Yes, because you didn't have it prepared earlier, she interrupted, her words sharp. When Emily is here, everything feels more put together. She doesn't need to be told what to do. I clenched my hands at my sides, biting back the words I wanted to say. Emily stayed for less than an hour, I replied carefully. She didn't even stay for dinner. That's not the point, Beatrice snapped, leaning forward slightly. Emily knows how to handle herself. She doesn't wait for me to tell her when or how to do things. She's considerate. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my composure. I've been here every day, Beatrice. I've been doing everything I can to make sure you're comfortable. And yet, somehow, it always feels like a struggle, she shot back, her voice growing colder. You're here physically, Clara, but emotionally, you're checked out. You don't seem like you actually want to be here. Her words struck like a blow, my chest tightening. That's not fair, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. I've put my life on hold to be here for you. I've been... Sacrificing? She cut in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Oh, how noble of you. If it's such a burden, Clara, maybe you should have just let Emily handle it. She's busy, yes, but at least she doesn't make me feel like I'm an inconvenience. I opened my mouth, then closed it, unsure of how to respond. The hurt and anger bubbled inside me, but I knew saying anything more would only make it worse. Instead, I straightened, my voice quiet but firm. I'm doing my best, Beatrice. I'm sorry if that's not enough. She waved a hand dismissively, turning back to the television. Your best isn't what I need, Clara. Emily understands me in ways you never will. The room felt suffocating, her words hanging in the air like smoke. Without another word, I turned and left, retreating to the guest room to collect myself. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of her. Sitting on the edge of the guest bed, I stared at the neatly folded clothes in my suitcase, my thoughts swirling. Beatrice's words replayed in my mind, each one digging deeper into the ache that had been building for weeks. No matter how much I gave, how much I tried, it was never enough. And it never would be. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages, landing on the last one from Ben. "You've done enough, Clara. Please come home." The words felt heavier now, but they also carried a clarity I hadn't wanted to admit before. Ben was right. I had done enough. I'd given up my time, my energy, and my peace of mind to be here, hoping it might make a difference. But nothing I did would ever compare to the pedestal Beatrice had placed Emily on. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't see me, who didn't value what I was giving. I let out a shaky breath, wiping the tears that threatened to spill. It wasn't about giving up. It was about knowing when I'd reached my limit. For my own sanity, I had to stop waiting for Beatrice's approval. I had to go home. I decided to talk to Barris that afternoon. The air between us was thick, heavy with everything that had been left unsaid. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, determined to finally speak my mind. "Beatrice," I began, my voice steady but soft. "I need to talk to you." She glanced up briefly, her expression unreadable. "If this is about dinner tonight, I'd rather you focus on getting it right than wasting time chatting." My jaw tightened, but I pushed through. "No, it's not about dinner. It's about how I've been treated since I got here." Her hand froze mid-stir, and she finally looked at me, one eyebrow arched. "Oh? And how exactly have you been treated, Clara?" I took a deep breath, the words spilling out before I could second-guess myself. "I've been here every day, doing everything I can to take care of you. I've rearranged my life, missed important moments, and given you all of my energy. And yet, no matter what I do, it's never enough. You've made it clear time and time again that you don't value me, and honestly, I'm tired of being treated like I'm worthless." She set her spoon down with a deliberate clink, folding her hands in front of her. "Well," she said coolly, "if you're tired, Clara, no one's forcing you to stay. Frankly, Emily would do a much better job anyway. She always has." Her words stung, sharper than I'd expected, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. "Emily isn't here, Beatrice," I said, my voice firmer now. "She's never here for more than an hour or two. I've been the one taking care of you. But if you think she can do better, then fine. I'm done." Beatrice didn't flinch, her expression hard as stone. "Good," she said with disdain. "I won't miss the complaining. At least Emily knows how to show respect." I nodded slowly, the finality of her words settling over me like a cold weight. "I hope she can give you what you need," I said quietly, "because I won't be back." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away, my chest tight but my head held high. It was over. I was done. Back in the guest room, I packed my things with quiet determination. Each folded piece of clothing felt like another weight lifted off my shoulders. Beatrice's cutting words still rang in my ears, but I shoved them aside. It was over. I was done bending myself into knots for someone who didn't value me. Once everything was packed, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. My thumb hovered over Emily's number before I pressed call. The line rang several times before she finally picked up. "What is it, Clara?" Emily answered, her tone clipped and impatient. "I'm kind of busy right now." I took a deep breath, refusing to let her attitude get to me. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "I've packed my things and I'm heading home. Beatrice needs someone here, so congratulations. You're up." "What?" she snapped, her voice immediately rising. "Wait, what are you talking about? You can't just leave." "I can, and I am," I said firmly. "I've done my part, Emily. It's your turn now." She let out a high-pitched laugh, the kind that came more from disbelief than amusement. "Oh, sure. Just drop everything on me, why don't you? Do you have any idea how busy I am? I can't just—" "I've been here for weeks," I cut in, my voice steady. "You've had time to prepare for this. Mom's your responsibility too, and she seems to think you're better at this anyway. I'm sure you'll figure it out." "Are you kidding me?" Emily shrieked, her tone growing more frantic. "I don't have time to babysit her. That's your thing, Clara. You're the caretaker, not me." "Not anymore," I said, my voice cold. Good luck, Emily. Before she could respond, I hung up, exhaling a shaky breath. I stood, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the door. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. It was time to leave. 4 days had passed since I left, and I had tried my best not to think about what might be happening back at Beatrice's house. But when my phone buzzed late that evening, I saw her name flashing on the screen. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but curiosity, and maybe a bit of guilt, got the better of me. I picked up. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Clara," Beatrice's voice came through, shaky and strained. She sounded different, tired, maybe even desperate. I need to talk to you." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. "Is everything okay?" "No," she admitted, the word heavy with frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. "Emily hasn't been here since you left. She's barely answering my calls, and when she does, she has some excuse about work or being too busy. She promised me she'd be here." I bit my lip, resisting the urge to say I told you so. Instead, I stayed quiet, letting her vent. "I've had to do everything on my own," Beatrice continued, her voice trembling. "I can't even manage the stairs some days. I don't know what to do, Clara. I feel completely abandoned." Her words hit harder than I expected, stirring a mixture of emotions, sympathy, vindication, and a lingering ache of resentment. She had treated me like I was nothing, and now she was realizing what it meant to truly feel alone. "I'm sorry to hear that, Beatrice," I said finally, my tone neutral. "But I warned you this might happen. Emily's good at saying the right things, but she's never been the one to follow through." There was a long pause, and for the first time, Beatrice's voice softened. I didn't think she'd just leave me like this. I thought she cared." I stayed silent, not wanting to twist the knife. Beatrice was finally feeling the consequences of her favoritism, and while a small part of me felt justified, another part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for her. I took a deep breath, clutching the phone tightly. "Beatrice, I'm sorry you're feeling this way. I wouldn't wish this on anyone," I began, my voice quiet but steady. "But I can't just come back. Not right now." "What do you mean, not right now?" she snapped, her tone immediately sharp. "I mean I can't drop everything again to move back in," I said firmly, though my heart ached as I spoke. "Beatrice, you treated me like I was nothing when I was there. I gave everything I could, and you made me feel like I didn't matter. I can't put myself through that again." Her response was immediate and furious. "Oh, so now you're going to hold a grudge, are you?" she yelled, her voice rising. "You think you're so perfect, Clara? You think I didn't notice the mistakes you made while you were here? Don't act like you're some martyr. You've never been good enough for this family, and now you're proving it." Her words hit like a slap, but I kept my voice calm. "Beatrice, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I know I made mistakes. But I tried. I gave everything I had, and you never saw that. And now, after everything, you expect me to come back as if none of that happened?" She let out a bitter laugh, her tone dripping with anger. "I should have known. You're just like everyone else, selfish. At least Emily would never abandon me like this." "Emily already has," I said quietly, the words hanging in the air. There was a stunned silence on the other end before she exploded again. "Don't you dare talk about Emily like that. She has her reasons, unlike you, who's just looking for an excuse to quit." Tears welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Beatrice, but I can't come back. Not like this." Before she could yell more, I ended the call, my hands trembling. The weight of her words sat heavy on my chest, but I knew I couldn't go back. Not now, and maybe not ever. 5 days passed, and I tried to move on, pushing the memories of Beatrice's anger to the back of my mind. I was starting to feel a sense of peace again, though it was fragile, held together by long walks and conversations with Ben. Then late in the evening, my phone buzzed. It was her. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. With a deep breath, I picked up. Hello? Clara? Beatrice's voice broke on the other end, shaky and filled with tears. Clara, I'm so sorry. Her sobs were raw, her words tumbling out in fragments. I don't know what to say. I've been sitting here thinking about everything, and I can't believe how awful I was to you. You didn't deserve any of it. I don't even know why I acted like that. You gave so much, and I threw it back in your face. I sat down, stunned. Beatrice, I started, but she cut me off. No, let me finish, she pleaded, her voice trembling. I've been so unfair to you, Clara. So blind. You didn't have to come here, but you did. You took care of me when no one else would. And I treated you so terribly. Her sobs deepened and my chest tightened. I regret it so much, she choked out. Emily hasn't been here in days, and now I see it. I see what you were saying all along. I need you to know how sorry I am. I didn't deserve your kindness, but you gave it anyway. Tears pricked at my eyes, her sincerity cutting through the pain I'd been carrying. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Thank you, Beatrice, I said softly. That means more than you know. I don't expect you to forgive me, she whispered, her voice cracking. But I had to tell you. I'm so sorry. I sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. I'll need time, I said finally, my voice gentle but firm. But I appreciate your apology. It's a start. It is, she said, her sobs quieting. I'll try to do better, Clara. I promise. When the call ended, I set the phone down, my heart heavy but lighter all at once. For the first time, it felt like there was a path forward, however slow it might be. After Beatrice recovered, everything was different. She treated me with kindness and gratitude, her sharp edges replaced by genuine warmth. Each visit was lighter, filled with moments of connection instead of tension. Beatrice went out of her way to show her appreciation, and while the past couldn't be erased, it no longer weighed us down. For the first time, I felt truly valued, and that made all the difference.